Adanna thought she had found the perfect man. Chuka was everything she had dreamed of. Handsome, smart, and charming. He knew how to make everyone laugh, how to say the right things, and how to make her feel special. Their wedding was beautiful, filled with smiles and hopes for a happy future. But not long after they said, "I do," things started to change. First it was small. During a family dinner, Chuka made a joke about her cooking. Everyone laughed, including her, though her cheeks burned. Later that night, she told him it hurt her. He smiled and said, "I was only joking. You're too sensitive." She tried to brush it off. Maybe she was overthinking. But it didn't stop there. Slowly, his words grew sharper, his tone colder. He would say things like, "You looked better before marriage?" Or, "Are you really wearing that?" Always with a smile. Always in front of people. Then he'd shrug, laugh, and say, "Relax, it's just a joke." But to Adanna it wasn't funny. Each word left a scar. She started to question herself. Maybe she wasn't smart enough. Maybe she wasn't pretty enough. In public, Chuka was the loving husband. Charming, generous, adored. But in private and around his family, he used his words like knives, cutting her confidence piece by piece. Adanna stayed quiet. She didn't want to make a scene. She didn't want to be that wife. But inside something was breaking. And it wasn't love. It was her. Adanna was nervous but excited. It was her first big family dinner in Enugu with Chuka's relatives. She wore her best dress and cooked her favorite native dish, hoping to impress. She wanted to be accepted, to be seen as part of the family. But from the moment she stepped into the room, something felt off. Mama Ifeoma, Chuka's mother, barely looked at her. When she finally did, it was to say, "Is that what you call cooking?" Followed by a loud fake laugh. Everyone joined in. Adanna forced a smile. She thought maybe it was just playful teasing. But then came the comments about her dress. "So plain," Mama said, shaking her head. "You really wore that to a family dinner?" It didn't stop there. Someone asked Adanna what she wanted to do with her life. She spoke shyly about her dream of starting a fashion brand. Before she could finish, Chuka cut in, laughing. "She wants to be the next big designer," he said, rolling his eyes. "With what talent?" The table roared with laughter. Adanna froze. Her face burned. Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She looked at Chuka, searching for some sign of support, some kind of rescue. But he was laughing too, loud and proud, as if mocking her made him more of a man. No one came to her defense. Not even once. She sat in silence, forcing her smile, pretending not to care. But inside, her heart was shattering. Every word, every laugh, every side glance chipped away at her spirit. She had never felt so small. This wasn't just dinner. This was a battlefield, and she was the only one without a weapon. That night, when they got home, she asked Chuka why he said those things. He shrugged and said, "You take things too seriously. My family is just joking." But it didn't feel like a joke. Felt like rejection. Felt like she didn't belong. And the worst part? The man she married was leading the attack. It was a Friday night, and they were at a friend's birthday party. The music was loud, the laughter louder. Everyone was dressed up and having fun. Adanna stayed close to Chuka, smiling, trying to enjoy the night. But as usual, he found a way to embarrass her. They were standing in a group when someone complimented Adanna's outfit. Before she could even say thank you, Chuka laughed and said loudly, "Don't mind her. She's just a wife, not exactly a woman of value." The group went quiet. A few people gave nervous chuckles, unsure if it was a joke. But Chuka just sipped his drink like he'd said nothing wrong. Adanna stood there frozen. Her heart felt like it had dropped to the floor. She could feel the sting in her eyes, but she refused to cry. Not there, not in front of them. Without a word, she picked up her bag and walked out. She didn't go home. She didn't even know where she was driving. She just needed to get away. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. Her ears rang from his words. She parked in a quiet corner of a shopping complex and turned off the engine. The silence hit her hard. She sat there, alone in the dark car, staring out the window. The tears finally came, hot, silent, endless. She cried for the girl who once believed in love. She cried for the woman she was becoming. Someone who didn't even recognize herself anymore. The night was cold, but not colder than Chuka's words. She curled up in the back seat, using her shawl as a blanket. But in that dark, painful moment something changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just stillness. Quiet realization. I don't deserve this, she whispered to herself. For the first time she didn't just feel broken. She felt awake. She didn't know what would come next. But one thing was clear. She couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. And maybe that something had to start with her. The next morning, Adanna sat alone on her bed, her eyes swollen from crying. She hadn't slept much. Chuka came home late, didn't say a word, just tossed his keys and went straight to bed like nothing happened. As if breaking her heart in public meant nothing. Adanna stared at the ceiling thinking about every insult, every lie, every time he made her feel small. She needed answers. She needed to understand how she ended up here loving a man who broke her spirit, and laughed while doing it. Then she remembered something. A name Chuka once slipped during an argument, Tari. He had called her mad and said she ran away. Back then, Adanna didn't think much of it. But now, something told her there was more. She picked up her phone and called her old friend Nkechi. Do you remember Chuka's ex, Tari? She asked. There was silence on the line. Then Nkechi whispered, you really want to go down that road? Yes, Adanna replied. I need to. With Nkechi's help, she found Tari's number. Her heart raced as she typed the message. Hi, my name is Adanna. I'm Chuka's wife. I think you and I have something in common. Tari replied within the hour. They met the next day at a quiet cafe. When Tari walked in, Adanna was shocked. She looked strong, calm, like someone who had survived a storm and was now the weather itself. Tari didn't waste time. I left Chuka because he broke me. With his words, his lies, his charm, he made me feel crazy, useless. Adanna's eyes filled with tears. It was like listening to her own story from someone else's mouth. Then Tari opened her phone and started showing Adanna screenshots. Old texts from Chuka, voice notes where he mocked her, chats where he insulted even his own mother. And finally she pulled out a photo. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, smiling wide. Same eyes, same dimples as Chuka. He never claimed him, Tari said quietly. Pretended we never happened. Adanna sat there stunned. Her pain wasn't just hers, this man had done it before. Adanna stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup slowly, her mind calm but sharp. It had been 2 weeks since she met Tari. 2 weeks of thinking, planning, and finally deciding enough was enough. But she wasn't going to scream or cry this time, she was going to do it her way. She told Chuka she wanted to host a family dinner. I want peace, she said softly. Maybe if your family sees I'm still trying, things will get better. Chuka looked surprised but also pleased. That's more like the woman I married, he said, kissing her forehead. He thought she was back to being the quiet, obedient wife. He had no idea what was coming. She called everyone Mama Ifeoma, Uncle Ibuka, cousins, aunties, the whole clan. And then she sent a private message to one last guest. Tari. She didn't tell anyone who Tari was. She just said, please come. Just sit, listen, and when it's time, tell your truth. The night arrived. The house was clean, candles lit, food smelling perfect. Adanna looked stunning in a soft blue gown. Calm, graceful, in control. As guests filled the room with chatter and laughter, Chuka played the perfect host, shaking hands and cracking jokes. He leaned over and whispered, see? I told you all you needed was to try harder. Adanna smiled, but inside her heart was steel. Then the doorbell rang. She opened it and there stood Tari, dressed simply, her head held high. Adanna welcomed her in like an old friend, and no one batted an eye. Just another guest, they thought. Dinner was served. Jollof rice, egusi, pepper soup, everything made to impress. Everyone ate, laughed, gossiped. Chuka was glowing, thinking he had won. That Adanna had returned to his version of love, quiet, pretty, and blind. But as the plates were being cleared, Adanna stood up slowly, her voice calm, her eyes steady. Thank you all for coming. Tonight I wanted to introduce someone who knows Chuka better than most of us ever did. Heads turned. Chuka blinked, confused. Then Tari stood up. The room fell silent. Laughter filled the room. Mama Ifeoma was already on her second plate, praising herself for raising such a handsome and successful son. Uncle Ibuka told one of his long, dramatic stories, and the cousins were busy making TikTok videos near the dining table. Chuka, of course, was the star of the evening, smiling, joking, acting like the perfect husband in front of everyone. And Adanna? She played her part. Smiling, nodding, pouring drinks. Calm on the outside, fire on the inside. No one noticed how her hands tightened around the wine glass. No one saw how her eyes scanned the room carefully, waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, she stood up. The chatter slowly died down. Her voice was soft but steady. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. I know it's been a while since we all sat together like this. But before we end the evening, there's someone I'd like you all to meet. Someone who knows Chuka better than any of us ever have. Chuka looked up, confused. Mama Ifeoma raised an eyebrow. Then the front door opened. And in walked Tari. She didn't come in shy or nervous. She walked in like a woman who had been silent for too long, and was finally ready to speak. The room froze. Forks dropped. Eyes widened. Mama Ifeoma gasped out loud. Chuka's face went pale. He stood up quickly. What is this? Adanna, what are you doing? Adanna didn't flinch. She looked him dead in the eye and said, I'm letting the truth speak for itself. Tari stepped forward, calm and composed. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply smiled and said, Good evening, everyone. My name is Tari, and I used to love Chuka. Before I realized he only knows how to destroy the women who love him. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. Adanna sat back down slowly, her heart pounding but her face calm. She had handed over the stage. Now it was time for the truth to do what Chuka's charm never could. Expose everything he tried so hard to hide. The room was dead silent. Not even the sound of a spoon clinking. Everyone stared at Tari, waiting. Some looked confused. Others already looked uncomfortable. Chuka stood stiff, trying to fake a calm face, but his eyes were darting, nervous. Tari took a breath, looked around the room and began. Her voice was calm, but every word carried weight. Years ago, Chuka and I were in a relationship. He told me he loved me, promised marriage, even introduced me to a few friends as his future wife. I believed him. I trusted him. She paused, then looked directly at Mama Ifeoma. I got pregnant. The moment I told him, he disappeared. Gasps filled the room. Mama Ifeoma's eyes widened in shock. Chuka opened his mouth to speak, but Tari raised a hand. Let me finish. She pulled out her phone and began showing screenshots to the relatives nearby. Here are his messages. He called me a liar. Accused me of trying to trap him. Blocked me. Never even asked once about the baby. Then she swiped to another folder. And just so you all know, this is not the first time he's disrespected a woman. Or even this family. She turned the phone toward the table and showed saved chats. Text from Chuka, where he complained about Mama Ifeoma being too controlling. Where he said she was too local to understand his big plans. The same mother he always claimed to love so dearly. Gasps turned into whispers. Aunties looked at each other. Mama Ifeoma looked stunned, unsure whether to cry or scream. Then Tari delivered the final blow. She pulled a photo out of her bag. A little boy smiling wide with dimples just like Chuka's. This is my son, she said. He's 5. And he's never met his father. She placed the photo on the table. One of the cousins leaned in and whispered, He looks exactly like Junior, referring to Chuka's nephew. The silence turned heavy, painful. Chuka's lips moved, trying to form excuses, but no one cared to listen anymore. For a few long seconds no one moved. Tari's words hung in the air like smoke. The photo of the little boy sat on the table, staring back at everyone with Chuka's exact dimples, undeniable proof. Mama Ifeoma blinked rapidly, held her chest and gasped. It's a lie. It's a lie, she whispered, before her eyes rolled back and she collapsed onto her chair. Auntie, someone shouted. The room burst into panic. Cousins rushed to her side. Someone grabbed water. But even in the chaos, one voice cut through clearly, Uncle Ibuka. He stood slowly, clapping slow and loud. Finally, he said. Truth tastes better than your lies, Chuka. Chuka looked around, his face red with anger and embarrassment. This is nonsense. You all believe this? She's bitter. She's just angry I moved on. He pointed at Tari, then at Adanna. And you? He growled, you planned this? After everything I did for you. But no one responded. Even the aunties who once adored him were now whispering behind their hands, staring at the photo, shaking their heads. One aunt, who always praised his wisdom, now stood up and spat her words like fire. You insulted a queen, Adanna, every chance you got, while hiding filth under your crown. Another cousin muttered. So all this time you were the one bringing shame to this family, not her. Chuka tried to speak again, but his words came out shaky. You're all taking their side? They're lying. This is all fake. But his voice had lost its power. No one was clapping for him now. No one was laughing at his jokes. Adanna stood quietly in the corner, watching it all unfold. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth was louder than anything she could have said. Chuka looked around for support, from his mother, from his uncles, from anyone. But all he saw were eyes full of disappointment. The same family that once cheered for him was now turning away. And for the first time Chuka felt what it was like to be the one left alone in a room full of people. The morning after the dinner, Adanna woke up feeling light. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in a long time she felt free. No more pretending. No more walking on eggshells. No more making excuses for a man who broke her piece by piece. She packed quietly. No drama. No shouting. Just a small suitcase and a calm heart. She didn't take the jewelry he bought, or the clothes she used to impress his family. She didn't even touch the wedding album. She left it all behind except her dignity. As she walked out the door, Chuka tried to stop her. Adanna, wait. We can fix this. She looked him in the eye, calm and steady. I'm not broken. You are. She closed the door behind her and didn't look back. Tari was waiting for her. Over the next few weeks they met more often. Not as two women who once loved the same man, but as survivors who refused to stay silent. Tari told her about the women's shelter she helped run. A safe space for women who needed to escape emotional and physical abuse. Adanna didn't hesitate. I want to help. I want to speak. Together they launched a campaign online. It started with one simple but powerful line. Know his face, not just his smile. They shared stories, not just their own, but voices of other women who had suffered in silence. Women who looked perfect on the outside but were breaking inside. The campaign exploded. Videos, interviews, anonymous letters. Thousands of comments. Messages poured in from women who said, "This is my story too." One woman wrote, "Because of you, I realized it wasn't my fault." Adanna became the face of strength, not sorrow. She went on radio, podcasts, panels, not as Chuka's wife but as Adanna, the woman who rebuilt herself. She didn't just walk away from pain. She turned it into purpose. And every time she stood in front of a crowd and said, "I survived with nothing but my name and my truth," people listened. Because the world had seen enough charming smiles. Chuka showed up one afternoon, unannounced. He stood outside the women's center, looking smaller than Adanna had ever seen him. No charm, no pride. Just a man who had finally realized what he'd lost. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything. I didn't mean to hurt you." Adanna looked at him for a long moment, then said calmly, "You embarrassed me once, but I educated you forever." She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, holding all the guilt he thought he'd never feel. These days, Adanna's voice reached further than Chuka's ever could. She spoke on radio about emotional abuse, how it doesn't leave bruises on the skin but it scars the heart. Her story became more than pain, it became power. At her last event, after sharing her journey, a young woman walked up with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "Because of you, I left before he hit me." Adanna smiled gently and hugged her. That one sentence meant everything. Chuka, meanwhile, faded into the background. His charm no longer fooled anyone. Friends turned cold. Family stayed distant. His lies were now public history. But Adanna? She kept rising. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she finally understood her worth. She wasn't just the woman who walked away. She became the woman who helped others find their way out too.